Alrighty, let's move on to our next storyboard element, or storyboard secret, I guess, which is grids. Now, grids are just a very elementary way of kind of approaching how to do backgrounds, how to do floors, ceilings, walls, whatever you kind of want to, just wherever you want to show a flat surface, you could employ a grid, which, as you can sort of see, is just essentially learning how to sort of draw vaguely straight lines and fan out and then kind of crisscross across those. So you can practice that a few times on a page, whatever sort of suits you. Another very sort of, I prefer to just sort of freehand draw them myself where I want to, but I've gotten kind of good at drawing shapes and so on just by freehand. If you're not so confident, an easy way to kind of go about that is to just hold shift and draw. If you're in Photoshop, most drawing applications will kind of follow something, and then just draw a few lines equispaced from each other and crisscross over them like you're making a tile pattern. Cool. So we've got our grid on the right layer, Control T, and then hold down Control as you start to mess around with these corner handles, and then just place it kind of wherever you want. You can go right off screen if you want to, make it as big or as small as you wish, and that way you can get a pretty convincing little grid. I like to sort of play around with the grid a little bit. I might throw the opacity down a little bit. I won't throw it down too much, just so we can see what we're kind of doing there. And from here, you've got a perfectly good solid floor space on which to draw your little star person, to draw your character with. And most people kind of think like, oh well, do you really need the grid all that much, especially if you're not doing floors or doing like a tile floor or something, which is not a bad question. But I'll show you what kind of happens if we don't have the grid down there. Just in general, we kind of just have a character floating, doing nothing very much, not really being centered anywhere. More than that, however, we don't have any further context, which is, I'll show you now. If we don't have context, we don't have context for the camera. With the character just floating as they are here in nothingness, I'll just sort of pull this guy up a little bit. With the character floating here in nothingness, we kind of default in our minds to, okay, this is an even level shot. However, when we throw a grid in there, suddenly we go, that's not exactly a level shot, actually. That's more of that's a slight up angle. We can affect that angle even further by pulling the grid way up, and then the angle becomes even steeper looking down on this character. Or we could flip this totally. Can I flip this? I can flip this. If I put the camera, if I change the angle of the floor grid like that, suddenly I'm looking up at this character. I've got an up angle going, and we've changed nothing about the character themselves. The character's still a blank mannequin that is staring completely neutrally. We can sort of combine both of those and have a floor and what I think of as a roof grid or a sky grid. And now we have a perfectly level shot. But generally, I like to throw a grid in there just to ground the camera somehow, regardless of what is going on with the character, regardless of where we might think we are. And this is very easy for a lot of storyboarders to get lost in. Generally, we know where we are in the scene, but the problem is that whoever's looking at the storyboards might get momentarily confused, and confusion, however momentary, in storyboarding is what we want to avoid. We always want to make sure that we're communicating exactly what we want to communicate. So we have to think about things that might seem obvious to us but are not obvious to others. For instance, what this angle actually is. And even if this character were out in the clear blue sky, I ask my students to do a sky grid anyway, because again, it still implies, like, even without the sky grid and with just clouds and so on, you kind of see how that instantly levels out or flattens the image and doesn't give us a good sense of whether the camera is below our level or above our level. So yeah, even if there's just clouds in the background, I still ask students to throw a sky grid in there just for context's sake. So one very powerful way to use grids is in when you're trying for some more architectural type drawing, I am not going to pretend that I'm a huge proponent or lover of perspective, however many points of perspective. For me, it gets a little bit boring, a little bit verbose, and a little bit over the top, really. Where honestly, I just want to kind of throw down some work and get my scene together a little bit. But I will say that grids are very useful if you're trying to, say, draw a city street or something, and you're trying to get an impression across of both a sense of like the depth that you can get on a city street, but also kind of get that busyness that can kind of happen on a city street. And you can see my perspective is all over the bloody place here. But I'm kind of what I'm going for isn't necessarily perfection. I'm going for something that just feels kind of correct. When you're sort of playing around with, do I have some brushes? Kind of. When I'm playing around with trying to put a scene together, I'm playing around with a number of different ideas. In this specific instance, I'm sort of playing around with the idea of repetitive shapes. And the repetitive shapes that go off into the distance really can help that sense of distance. Like if we're working here with sort of windows, for example, we can use the same sort of window on a building. And it doesn't even have to be a very strong impression necessarily, but we can use the lines as a kind of guide. And you can see I'm freehanding the ever-loving daylights out of this particular drawing. But I'm trying to find just building-ish looking cornices and little, I don't know, decorations you might see on some old like New York style buildings. I'm going for repetitiveness in line and sort of using using what I've thrown down there just as a straight guide. Maybe you don't really get buildings quite as wide as this. I'm going to break this one up into two different buildings. You're welcome to use your shift key to even this out. You can see I kind of forego that sometimes, and I'm using a little bit of shadow just to break these buildings up. I don't know what kind of maybe this one's more like a glass fronted building. Maybe it's got a little like front thing over there, but it's mostly just glass fronting. That kind of looks convincing in a way. This one also might be just small little square, just vague little squares, like and 6 of them per block. You know, I hope you're getting the idea that I'm trying to put across here. The more you have repetitive shapes, the more easily you can kind of build up the sense of distance. And it doesn't even have to be super accurate in order to really read. And reading is kind of what we mean as board artists or as filmmakers when we say something has to just look basically right enough. Kind of right enough, not perfect. It just has to have the basics down in order for your audience not really to question it or look at it too hard. So yeah, I'm gonna add a couple windows just over here. And I've kind of got the beginnings of a city street going on down here. I think I'm gonna add a little bit of, I'm going to add some people, and the people kind of grow larger. That's one important thing to remember about your repetitive shapes, is making sure the people grow larger or smaller as distance kind of takes over. But again, like, you don't need to be super intense about this. This is, for instance, how I'm going to do cars, which for me, a car is a vague blob with kind of a back window or a front window. And that's about it. That's really about it. Maybe if I want to get fancy, I'll add some wheels on there. You really got to just decide on what your detail is, on how much effort you want to put into these repetitive shapes, just by dint of the fact of, like, what is the point of the scene? If the cars aren't the point of the scene, if everything is the point of the scene, if the impression of a city is the point of the scene, then I don't care about this car. It doesn't matter to me so much. I don't care about the individuals on the pavement, because all I really need to see of those individuals is that they make up a crowd. That's all the impression I really kind of need there. If I was going to try and pull anything specific out of this scene. In fact, I would have to, I don't know, I'd have to make something interesting happen. I'd have to pick it out in terms of color, say there's like a Spider-Man character, like going, zooming off or something. I'd have like a pretty steady static street, and then I'd have a dude zooming through here, that and put him in a different color and put him in red or something. So like have a huge arc straight through there that would be easy to see, would be easy to follow. You get what I'm trying to say. But yeah, that's how I would kind of use grids to maybe mock up something a little closer to an architecturally believable sort of scene, and just use repetitive images, or repetitive shapes and repeating images to both give myself that sense of distance and kind of use that grid and kind of essentially just decorate the grid. So I hope that's helpful. As usual, let me know if you try this. Let me know how your experiments go. Please drop any questions in the comments, and thank you so much for watching.